Good day. It's the Ubuntu podcast time again, season 12, episode 11, and we're recording this on Tuesday, June the 18th. This week we're going to have some news and community stuff, maybe an event and some other bits and bobs. But let's crack on with what we've been up to. I'm joined this week by Mark and Martin. Hello, both of you.
Hello.
Hello.
What have you been up to?
Well, the same thing you've been up to, I expect.
FOSS Talk Live.
I know! Wasn't it brilliant? We went to FOSS Talk Live and we were second on the billing. I really think we probably should have been third, don't you?
Yes.
Does that mean we're better or worse?
Oh, God, yeah. Better, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, totally. So what was your best part of the experience of FOSS Talk Live then, Mark?
Mine was finding out what you two had been up to for the past 6 months.
Yes, that was fun, because for those people who haven't heard it or didn't see or weren't there or live under a rock, we had a little challenge for us to all write a thing, and we chose to write a game, and we didn't tell each other what we were doing. Well, we all knew we were writing a game, and we all knew it was written in Bash, but we didn't know what each other was doing, right?
Those were the rules.
When did we kick this off?
December the 19th last year.
Wow, okay. Someone's got a good memory.
I have a commit history.
Or a good commit history, yes.
Yeah, I don't really want to look at my Git commit history because it's going to be lots of, got this working. Oh, God, I've broken it again. Oh, no, I got it working again. No, this is rubbish. And then weeks of nothing. And then, oh, gosh, I've got to get this working again before the actual show. But yes, it was jolly good fun. It was a real departure from what we normally do, right?
It really was, and I think that was probably a good thing to do. We've mixed with the sort of the show format when we've done FOSS Talk in the past, and we've never done a traditional Ubuntu podcast, I don't think. And this one was a complete departure in that we set ourselves a challenge, and we'd all been working on it for 6 months. There was some considerable effort went into this.
Well,
some more of us than others.
Mark and I may have put some considerable effort into this, but nevertheless, it was a departure from the usual fare, and I think it was good for an audience to see. It wasn't, made for radio.
yes.
Yes, very much so.
So, not too many gotchas. I mean, mine had bugs in terms of scoring that Stuart Langridge kindly pointed out from the back row.
Yes, well, he's a maths wizard. Should we explain what we each did? Because we're being a bit vague at the moment. So, Alan, do you want to introduce what you did?
Well, people could go back and watch the show. We could put the link to the show in the show notes.
We will do that.
Oh, yes.
But yes, I made a silly word game.
And Mark, what did you create?
I made a 0-player RPG.
I just knew you would make a 0-player game. When you when you put the slides up, I was like, I knew he would do that.
It's a lot easier when you don't have to try and do user interaction in Bash.
True.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Whereas Martin went full on user interaction in Bash, the other end of the scale. What did you make, Martin?
I wrote a bullet hell shoot 'em up.
With wibbly wobbly Amiga demo type graphics and sounds and bosses and all sorts.
Yeah, and Steam controller support, the whole 9 yards.
Massively over the top.
Yes. It was quite amusing because the order we went on was Mark first, then me, then Martin. Martin said he wanted to go last.
Now I understand.
Yeah, the looks on everyone's faces when Martin went on stage was a combination of, wow, he's done really good work there, and also, hey, Alan, you've lost, in one facial expression. It was quite well done.
So I listened to the audio from that show whilst I was shopping earlier, and I didn't realise this at the time, but when my game starts, I can hear everyone in the audience have an intake of breath. It's very audible and also satisfying. So yes, it made all those hours of work very very much worth it.
I did have a minor hiccup, which I think I managed to gloss over, where I told Alan to make the terminal bigger after I'd already set some instances of my game running, and then I asked him to switch to them, and they all looked completely horrific and broken. I'll remember that if I ever have to do a presentation on this again.
Yes. When I switched the terminals, I thought, oh no. And I tried to resize them back down again, but they didn't automatically redraw. And then I heard you shouting from the stage, go back, go back, go back. I was like, sorry. Yes. It's weird not being able to rehearse at all because we weren't able to see each other's presentation or each other's code. So I handed my laptop to you guys to prep. And so my laptop was ready. And then each of us had to control the presentation like remotely with remote hands from the other presenters. And that was an extra variable that you wouldn't normally have in any presentation you give.
Yeah, you might get people typing things on the screen without your control, for example.
I think we managed that quite well, considering that we knew what the structure of the show was, but that whole bit of interaction, we really didn't know what to expect from each other. And I loved that as well. I really enjoyed both your presentations. As good as yours was, Alan, I really enjoyed Mark's presentation because I hadn't preempted what Mark was going to create and was really quite taken with the innovative nature of this, multi-zero player game.
Yeah. I love it. I think it was fantastic.
Yeah.
And I learnt an enormous amount. There was I had the idea in my head for quite a while that I would like to do something like this. And then when I decided to do it, there were like some fairly big things that I had to learn just how to do, like how to get two bash programs to talk to each other in real time, for example.
That was my favourite part of your solution, actually. I really like that.
So for anyone who wants to figure out what on earth we're talking about, we'll put a link in the show notes to the video. You'll probably find it if you scroll back through our Twitter feed, to a video that was made by Marius, who also took part in the Great Bash Up show later on in the day. But go back and watch the video. It's worth watching, even though it's a dark and dingy basement of a pub. You'll get the atmosphere, and it's really worth a listen. But let's get on with the show. So let's start with some community news. And first up, I spotted an article by Ted Gould, who is an ex-Canonicler and one of the principal developers behind Inkscape and a bunch of other things.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he's written this blog post where he talks about how he does all his development in LXD containers. And this piqued my interest because I do a lot of stuff in LXD. And it's worth a read because not specifically for the LXD part, but he talks about how he has unified the way he SSHs to those containers. So this might also be interesting to people who SSH to remote hosts, not necessarily to containers. But it was interesting to me because he has this whole dynamic setup so that when he's at home and he SSHs and connects to a container, he types exactly the same command as if he's away from home. So if he's in a coffee shop or in the office, he can SSH to a container, and that might be at home on his desktop PC. And it does all the right things and tunnels and detects where he is and lands him on his development LXD container.
Oh, that's clever.
It's really rather nice. I was quite taken with this.
Is this not the future?
What, building everything in containers or SSHing from anywhere to anywhere?
The container thing. I'm like you, I'm increasingly doing work inside containers, and I'm starting to feel like containers are the place that you do work because you can create them anywhere, even on Chromebooks now, right? So if you adopt this way of thinking, this is a way to develop freely anywhere.
Yeah. And using LXD, I mean, we should say LXD is a product that's whose development is sponsored by Canonical, but we're just both massive fans of LXD. And so I kind of agree with you. I'm not really a developer as such, but I like to play with things, and I like to play with things that don't tarnish my main machine, like installing a bunch of development libraries and compilers and then wacky versions of things. Like if I'm building an Electron app or something, I don't really want all that Node stuff on my laptop. So I'll spin up a container, and I have built a number of Electron apps inside bespoke artisanal containers. And I know that every time I build it, it's going to be reliably built on inside that container, on a particular release. And it works really well. And I think I'm going to look at implementing the same thing that Ted talked about so that I can leave these containers on a bulky, fast machine at home and then SSH to them from anywhere on the planet. Like when I'm away at a sprint or in the London office, I can still get to them, which seems like a brilliant piece of engineering. I like that.
So, Mark, do you do much stuff in containers at work?
We're starting to experiment with containers for deployment, not for development yet, but I suspect we might go that way if the setup that we're looking at for deployment works out. The Moodle community does use containers quite a lot. There's like a standard Docker container that's published by Moodle HQ, which is essentially a Moodle server in a box, and then you can mount your code branch on it. And you've just got it there running on whatever machine your Docker container is running on, which is really nice. And then you could also deploy that same container and use it for automated testing and all sorts of things. So, it's certainly the way a lot of developers are going. And I can totally see why, for exactly the reasons that Alan said. Like at the moment, my local Moodle setup at home is in a VM to keep it separate from my main machine. But I would... when I next want to sort of redo my development environment, I would look at doing it with Docker instead.
And in further LexD interesting news, Martin, you've got something else.
Yeah, I found a blog from Simon Zinatellis, who has blogged about running Linux containers on the Windows subsystem for Linux 2, which, as we record, is just a few days old as a technical preview from Microsoft. Yeah,
I installed it in the bar,
of course,
last week when we were in Montreal. Dan Llewellyn was guiding me through the various options on my dual boot Windows laptop, telling me how I get the insider build. And there's a few hoops you have to jump through, but once you get WSL2 installed, you've got basically an Ubuntu install inside something that feels very familiar. And so what details does Simon go into in his blog post?
Well, he was trying to get LexD to work inside WSL2, which he did manage to do, but he had to jump through a few hoops because at the moment, everything that you need to run snaps and LexD is distributed as a snap, isn't enabled by default in WSL2. So he had to, chant some magical incantations and some manual mounting of paths and some network configuration, but he did manage to get it all to work.
So did he get snaps running or did he get LexD running without it being in a snap?
Well, both effectively, because LexD is distributed as a snap, but there are some tricks that you can use to download and unpack snaps and then run their contents.
I see.
So he did manage to get it all working. And it served as a very useful gap analysis for us, actually. So, we'll be able to use that to think about what improvements and defaults need to be changed in order to better support WSL2 when it comes out for reals later in the year.
Yeah, I did find it interesting. I did, out of curiosity, knowing that it doesn't work, I did run, snap list and snap find and stuff. And it actually gives you a friendly error message. Even the snap command is there by default. And some of the commands work. Like you can do snap version and it will tell you the version of the kernel is 4.whatever -Microsoft. And the version of snapd and all that kind of stuff that you would normally expect. But if you try and do anything more than that, it gives you a little error to say this doesn't work and is stubbed here for documentation purposes only.
And that's an interesting point, right? Because there is a single kernel that is distributed by Microsoft, and that single kernel is what all Linux distros that want to ship WSL2 will have to work with. So that's going to be a melting pot of, accommodation for the different distributions.
Oh gosh. So if you're going to run, for example, Fedora in WSL2, they might say, for full compliance, you should have SE Linux in there.
They may say that.
And OpenSUSE might say, we'd like AppArmor.
Indeed.
So that's going to be a challenge for Microsoft.
It is. It's fortunate that LSM stacking is a thing, so maybe there will be a way forward here that will mean everyone can be kept happy.
Cool. Moving on from LexD news, Mark, what else is new?
Well, the i386 architecture is going to be dropped as of Ubuntu 19.10, which is fine, and I'm sure no one will mind that.
Right, 32-bit x86, to be super clear. So this was announced earlier today as we record this, and there's been some varied reaction. Most of it is not necessarily positive, but, well, we sort of saw this coming. Other distros have done it, and 32-bit Intel is a bit old now, so it's hardly surprising.
We're not the first to drop it. So we have stopped releasing 32-bit Intel ISO releases, but the archive has still been there. And this change is that archive is going away as well.
So it looks like the advice for people who still want to run 32-bit things going forward, at least until 2023, is going to be to run 1804 in a VM or a container of some sort.
Or run it on the bare metal.
Oh, yes, of course.
Like if you want to if you could stick on 1804, because that's supported until 2023, you could just stay on 1804 or upgrade from whatever release you were on to 1804. The tricky part comes if you go beyond that, like if you've installed 1904 and somehow managed to get a 32-bit version of 1904 on your system.
Yeah, because users weren't automatically upgraded from 1804 if they were using 32-bit for that exact reason.
Yeah, they didn't want to get them stranded on 1904 and have no way forwards.
But in a callback to Alan and my blog post that we've found talking about LexD, another option, of course, is that you can have whatever Ubuntu version you like, and you could create LexD containers of 1804 and then run your old 32-bit applications inside LexD containers.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's kind of an advanced option that a developer might use, but I think it's having looked at Simon's blog post that you just talked about, it seems like some of these things are a bit more complicated than end users might be able to do. So I think there's going to have to be some work on making a turnkey solution for, if that's possible, I don't know, to make it possible for end users to provide some 32-bit legacy thing. Often these are like proprietary applications that, you don't have access to the source code, so you can't rebuild a 64-bit version, or they're just unsupported anymore and nobody's going to port them.
And there is one other option, of course, and that is if you are the application developer and you want to continue shipping a 32-bit Intel application, then you can create a snap. And that snap can use the 1804 base, which is going to be supported for the foreseeable future and will be a way for you to continue to deliver your application uninterrupted without having to deal with architecture support being removed or whatever.
Yeah, it's a difficult time because nobody wants things like this to go away, especially if you've had an install for a number of years. But the fact of the matter is we can't keep maintaining this. And even some of the Spectre Meltdown stuff doesn't appear. Like the fixes don't appear either in a timely fashion or at all for the 32-bit Intel. And so arguably you're insecure using 32-bit x86. And it's difficult to sometimes articulate to users that, you're potentially in danger running that old crusty software that's built for 32-bit. But it's difficult because users often, they don't care. They just want to be able to run that software and, hang the consequences. Difficult. I have to see how that pans out. I'll be interested to hear from our listeners if you've got any 32-bit systems, like genuine daily use 32-bit systems, not like me with crusty old ThinkPads in the cupboard that nobody ever uses, but actual, daily use 32-bit systems and what you actually use it for. Or have you got any 32-bit applications that are, vital to your workflow, or maybe games or whatever it is? I'm keen to hear your feedback. You can send that to the usual places, which are listed at some point on the website. And that's the end of the community news. We've got an event Mark, do you want to tell us what this event is?
It's OggCamp.
Yay!
Woohoo! Now, we've mentioned it before, but now we've got some more details. So it's on the 19th and 20th of October 2019, and it's at the Manchester Conference Centre, which is in the Pendulum Hotel in Manchester, UK. It's near Manchester Piccadilly Station, and tickets are available now. If you go to oggcamp.org and follow the Get Tickets link, tickets are pay what you want, including nothing if you don't want to pay anything. And the schedule is being firmed up for the scheduled track, and I believe that the speakers will be announced soon. Lorna Mitchell is organising the scheduled track, and she's been doing a fantastic job of getting an array of speakers, some of whom you will have known before, and some of you won't, I expect. And of course, it's an unconference, so the rest of it is decided on the day. So if you want to talk about something, you just come along and offer up your talk.
Yeah, I'm actually really looking forward to the unconferencey part, because that's where, new and interesting stuff that I'd never have, I wasn't expecting to see at OggCamp. It's nice to see some of the scheduled talks, and I certainly enjoyed learning about things like mainframes and optimizing image loading in web pages. I know it sounds ultra dull, but it was super interesting. I love hearing about this stuff that I just don't do on a daily basis. And I think that's one of the nice things about OggCamp. It's a mix of the social side, going out and having a few beers in the evening, but also learning about some stuff that you just wouldn't necessarily be exposed to on a daily basis or as part of your job. It's great.
Yeah, you get some really good sort of deep dives into people's hobby projects, as well as things people do at work, and people from communities, like open source communities, talking about their project, which you might have heard of, but you might not know much about. It's really a really good mix of stuff.
Totally. So, have you guys bought your tickets?
Not yet, but I will be. I intend to go, and I intend to put postcards up on the unconference talk board.
I am hoping to go, but I'm not quite sure yet, on account of it being about 3 weeks before the due date. So we're going to have to see how that works logistically.
Yes, you don't have to rush back from Manchester like I did once when I got a call a few weeks before a baby was due about 15 years ago. Yes. Yeah, you don't want that. All right. That's the end of all the community news and event. And now it's time for the big boy news. First up in the big boy news, Martin is a big boy. What's your first item of news?
What an introduction. Apparently there has been a Linux worm hitting unpatched Exim servers.
But I thought Linux didn't suffer from viruses.
Well, I was confused by this as well, and it appears to be a flaw that was found in Exim versions 4.87 to 4.91. So it's your usual, there's a problem in some source code somewhere, remote command execution. Somebody's figured it out and found a way to deploy it. And can you guess what they decided to use this exploit to do?
Send email?
No, that was not it. Although, that would have been ironic, right? Wouldn't it? It's to run a spam server off an Exim instance. Why did they not do that? The delicious irony.
Completely unnoticed. Yes, our mail server is happily sending email. Yes, that's working.
They missed a trick there. They totally missed a trick.
No. What did they actually use it for then?
Well, they went for the contemporary boring thing, which is obviously a crypto miner.
Oh, boring.
Yeah. Oh, they should have done the other thing. This is a dull article now. Anyway, it's fixed in Exim 4.92. So if you update, you're safe.
And if you find there's a mail server that's got a high CPU utilization, then probably you should update it and reboot it and maybe clean it and start all over again, maybe.
Have you noticed the Chromebook adverts recently?
I have.
They're selling themselves on the basis that they have built-in virus protection.
Interesting.
And yeah, so essentially they're running Linux.
I guess I mean, yes, we can take the jolly approach of pointing the finger and going, well, the virus protection is there aren't many viruses, you're not a target. But I guess they would argue that there is some level of checksumming and fingerprinting and all that kind of stuff in all their binaries that's checked from first boot all the way through to your application and data loading. So I imagine their marketing spiel will be something along those lines and not, well, it's Linux.
They don't mention Linux, just to be clear.
No, of course they don't.
And also, for all of our flippant coverage, if you want to hear exactly what this vulnerability is, then I recommend you tune in to the Ubuntu Security podcast, where Alex Murray does a much better job of breaking down this vulnerability and explaining how it all works.
Because that's his job.
That's his job, yes. He leads the Ubuntu security team. So, if you want to get the serious take on this, go and have a listen to the Ubuntu Security podcast instead.
Next up, there's an article by Stephen J. Vaughan Nichols suggesting that the upcoming end of life of Windows 7 is the last best shot for Linux.
Again?
Yeah.
Haven't we been here before?
We have a few times, yes. I think we've been here with Vista, was Linux's good shot for the desktop. And then after that, it was Windows 8, because Windows 8 was apparently terrible. I don't know. I've never even used it.
And the death of XP.
And the death of XP was another shot. And then Windows 10 was another shot because of all the privacy and the fact that it was rolling and you got lots of updates. So we've had lots of shots at this. Is this really the ultimate pinnacle of how we can get more people using Linux, is to ride on the piggyback of something else going end of life?
I think history tells us that that's not the answer, right? We've failed to execute on this 6 times. I don't think anything significantly has changed in the past 10 years, in that computer usage trends are broadly the same, which is most people use Windows.
Yeah, it's weird. It does feel like there isn't like a flood of people, coming through the floodgates. I know during, when we do an Ubuntu release, an LTS release specifically, I know that the mirrors get an absolute pounding, and, we have to, pay for significant CDN costs in order to host the ISOs and the update servers and all that kind of stuff, because it's quite popular. And a lot of people are interested in trying out the new LTS, and we certainly see an uptick in install numbers. But I'm not sure we're ready for the kind of influx that we'd get if, a percentage, let's say 10% of Windows 7 users just suddenly went, stuff this, let's try Linux. We'd be absolutely inundated with people from all around the world. I don't think we could cope.
And also, it doesn't really matter which Linux they go for, because it's either going to be Ubuntu or Elementary or Linux Mint or Pop OS. And all of these are derived from Ubuntu. So consequently, they all end up hitting the same infrastructure at the end of the day anyway.
Yeah, true. Although some of Elementary is hosted in Launchpad. Oh no, hang on, that's us as well.
Yes.
So, is it the case then that Linux just couldn't cope with being as successful as Windows because it doesn't have the infrastructure to support it?
I don't know if it's a lack of, it's infrastructure and support. And, if a large number of people in your community all switched to Linux, like there was some kind of, brain virus that made them forget that Windows existed, and they all decided to install Linux, who would they go to for support? Would you be inundated with people giving support? Probably not, because, you've got friends and you might provide support to friends. It would be the local computer shop, and they'd be overrun with people saying, I've installed this thing and it doesn't work. And what would they do? Would they make their own distro and charge for it? Because it would be lucrative, because there'd be lots of people there.
Or would they send them to Canonical, and could Canonical take that much business?
Well, exactly. I don't know how that would pan out. I actually think probably they would create their own distro and sell it. And that, because there's money in it. And where there's money in it, the retail is like desperate to get income.
There would definitely be some of that. There will always be an opportunist that is looking to capitalize on a trend. So there would definitely be people making distros called, I don't know, something like Lindos, something like that. But then the whole infrastructure thing, we know how to scale. One of the things that Linux does really well, and the people that work in and around Linux know how to do really well, is absorb the world's internet traffic and serve it. So I don't think that would be a problem at all, or if it was, for very long.
Right. I don't think it's bits and bytes. It's people that we'd be short of.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a thing to look out for when Windows 7 shuts down. You let us know if you get inundated with loads of Windows 7 refugees. And moving on, Mark, what's next?
Well, a developer called Andre Stoltz has written quite a long and detailed post where he's gone into the statistics of donations to 58 open source projects, and he's tried to work out if the donations received by the projects are enough to fund the developers who contribute to the projects. And he's gone into quite a lot of detail looking at various aspects about the relative popularity of each project and the what he estimates as the sort of full-time equivalents of the number of contributors to it, and then the donation levels they receive, and how that would map on to if you were trying to pay each person a full-time wage, what would they get, and how does that compare to what we would expect as a developer in the software industry, and what that how it compares to the poverty line and things like that.
So it's interesting looking at one of the graphs that he has. He's plotted open source projects, and he's based it on income per star versus the team size. So looking at how many full-time equivalent engineers that would be working on a project going in one axis, and the amount of revenue per GitHub star in the other direction, and highlighted some of the ones in green that have a decent amount of money per person, and the ones in red that have, below that poverty threshold. And I was quite surprised to see Electron has a large circle, so a large number of contributors, but not a lot of money thrown at it. And I wonder if that's just because there's some corporate entities behind that. So there are people who work for Slack and Microsoft and Google who work on that. And so the individual developers are paid a salary anyway.
Exactly, yeah. So that's something that this doesn't capture, is that the development effort that goes into these projects isn't necessarily entirely funded by donations to the project.
Whereas you look at a project like OBS, Open Broadcast Studio, where that's a green blob, but it has a very small number of active developers, but seems to be financially stable.
Yes. So he discusses a sort of sweet spot where if you can get a project which doesn't require a lot of people to maintain, but is very popular, then it's easier to make that financially sustainable with a donation model than something which requires a lot more people to maintain.
I think I could have come to that conclusion without actually doing any research and analysis.
What you're saying, if you have a lot of people and not enough money coming in, that's not a lot of money per person. Is that what you're saying?
I can evaluate what sustainable and unsustainable looks like, very simple terms. That, yeah, if you've got something that's popular, that's made by one person, then yes, it's going to be profitable. Isn't that Startup 101? Everyone that starts up the company can actually do something vital to making the product and service so that, you can do it on a shoestring.
Well, Martin, you're, as someone who runs an open source project that takes donations, how does your experience of this look in terms of the money you take in, and also you distribute some of that to other developers? So, what's your feeling for the amount of money that comes in, and could it become your full-time job, for example?
The amount of money that comes into Ubuntu Mate could sustain one full-time developer, as a full-time salaried position. That wouldn't be a well-paid, and I think it would probably be below the industry metrics for a software developer, but it could pay for one person.
And would that be enough to maintain the project?
No, because in actual fact, we have probably 10 people who are all pooling their time and effort into the project, and they all do that part-time, but collectively we probably represent about 4 or 5 people's full-time effort. So, that gives you some idea of the disparity between the money that comes in and, the money that we can use to sponsor individual projects that an individual will work on for maybe 1 or 2 weeks at a time. But then there are other Linux distros who pull in a significant amount of money, like Linux Mint. They pull in more than 10 times what Ubuntu Mate does. So they would be in a better position to be self-sustaining.
Maybe this is a topic for another show about the revenue, because I could talk for a while about Linux Mint's revenue. But we don't have time. We have time for one final piece of news, and that is that not only do you have to have your Exim email server checked for viruses, you also need to check your Samsung TV for viruses, according to Samsung.
The future is rubbish.
We know you've got a Facebook account, so stop sharing cat photos for a moment and like or share our posts so your friends and family can find the Ubuntu podcast.
Golly gosh, that went fast. Well, that's the end of episode 11, I think it is. And we'll be back next week when we're going to discuss the gallivanting that Martin and I did in Montreal. We'll talk all about that and other stuff, including Command Line Nav and all your feedback in next week's show. I just wanted to say thank you to Bitfolk for providing the VPS that hosts this wonderful show, and a quick thank you to Linux Academy for providing production services. See you next time.